Hello and welcome to Inside the Pod, the podcast of the Processors and Growers Research Organisation. I'm Ben Pike.
And I'm Becky Howard.
And today is a special edition of the podcast because we're talking about a pest that's been discovered in the UK for the first time. The Pea Bruchid was discovered in a single sample found on a farm earlier this year. Becky is the PGRO's expert on pests and knows more about these various types of beetle that have been discovered than most other people, probably in the UK, I'd expect, Becky, but you can perhaps clear us up on that one. Perhaps you wanted to just start by explaining to our listeners a little bit about what's happened, what's been discovered, and what do we know about it so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ben. So I'm not an expert in this particular pest, and it is in fact the first time that it's been recorded in a commercial crop in the UK. So that's quite worrying that we've detected it. It's Bruchus paizorum, which is the pea bruchid, very similar to Bruchus rufimanus, which is the bean bruchid that most farmers that grow beans will be very familiar with. And they're distinct species, but they act in exactly the same way. So what they do is infest the crop at flowering stage usually, and that's often April, May and into June. And in this case, Pea bruchid is very specific to peas, so it doesn't appear to have any, or at least many other plant hosts apart from possibly some wild pea type. It's a coleoptera, so it's a beetle, it's small, it's 4 to 5 millimeters long, and it flies into the flowering crops when temperatures reach 18 degrees. So very similar to the bean bruchid and at a roughly similar time. So we're talking from mid-April onwards. They need to feed on flowers, on pea flowers, in order to become reproductive. So when they do that, it takes approximately 2 weeks for them to start laying eggs. And they lay eggs directly onto the pea pods. The eggs themselves are slightly different from the bean bruchid eggs in that they're a slightly different colour. So they're an orangey yellow colour, but roughly the same size, so roughly 1.5 millimeters long, quite visible on the pods. And what happens then is they hatch immediately from the base of the egg into the pod and start feeding on the seeds underneath. So that means that when it comes to managing the pest, we're in the same position really as we are with the bean bruchid, is that there's no target once the eggs are laid. So we have to target the adults before eggs are laid, if that's what we need to do. Once the larvae continue to feed, they will then mature and reach adult maturity at the dry stage in peas. So that's a combining pea harvest. And they pupate. And then at that point, at the combining pea harvest stage, they emerge as adults. So they cut a hole in the seed and they'll either leave the seed and fly to overwintering sites, which are surrounding hedgerows and trees, or they will stay in the seed. And what often you can see then is a small translucent cap over where the adult is. So that's the situation in combining peas. So in combining peas, they reach full maturity and then you get your next generation of adults. They have a single generation each year, so that means that the adults that have laid the eggs will then die and the next generation moves into the overwintering sites. In vining peas, we don't have a position, unless vining peas are bypassed, where the adults would reach maturity. So if they're harvested at the green stage, they're at a larval stage. But that is, of course, highly problematic for the vining pea industry as well, because what you have larvae in the frozen produce. So any vining peas that would had this present in them would be rejected at the factory. So if we go on to talk about what issues they cause, there's the clear one of quality. So you've either got the hole in the pea, you've got adults present in peas, and that's live adults, or you've got larvae present in vining pea for frozen produce. So that's a quality issue. The second quality issue really is if you're growing peas for seed, and what in the case of peas, because the seed is much smaller, the bruchid presence or damage can have a direct impact on germination capacity. So it's likely that if you have a high level of infestation in a pea crop, the germination will be affected. And in fact, actually in peas, we do see some yield impact of Pea Bruchid, well, certainly in the countries where it's present in high quantities or at high levels. Yield is affected because the seed weight is reduced. So the damage inside the seed caused by the larvae feeding leads to a reduction in weight. So there can be quite a significant yield loss, actually. So that's the sort of very brief summary of how it operates. In terms of the conditions that it requires, they're pretty much exactly the same as the bean bruchid. So we would expect, if it was allowed to become endemic, that they could occupy the same regions that bean bruchid currently occupy. The biggest difference, I suppose, in the sense of how easy it might be for them to spread across the country is the proximity of pea crops to each other. So although we have some intensive pea cropping areas where vining peas are grown, they do not reach maturity in those areas unless peas are bypassed. And combining peas tend to be spread out a bit more than field beans, so the area is smaller. So the risk of spread is that it will likely happen a bit more slowly than it has done in beans. But nonetheless, the first incident and the first detectable incident is significant in the UK, and so we're looking at really putting a management plan in place at the moment to help us manage that situation and prevent it moving across the UK.
So quite a concerning issue, really, for a number of players in the supply chain. First and foremost, I guess the value of the crop that the farmer is growing is going to be reduced because it won't be fit for human consumption if it's damaged. That has a knock-on impact on those who are trying to buy and process or export the seed. And then the one that you've identified in the vining pea sector, nobody wants to bite into a pea and find a maggot in there, do they? So there's a sort of a number of concerning impacts there.
There are, and it's a smallish industry really. So I think the impact can be, if it was to become endemic or to spread more widely, is very significant. It has been controlled in countries such as New Zealand, for instance, where they don't have it endemic, by a complete ban on production of peas in a region. So, and they considered it to be that important to their vining pea industry, I think. And I think the other thing to sort of maybe talk about really is the impact it would possibly have on the seed industry. I mean, we know from risk assessments that we've done in the past that the primary way of it appearing in the UK was always going to be in seed. And currently legislation for certified seed of combining peas is, strictly says that they should not have live beetles present in them. But vining peas are not subject to the same regulations, so they go through the vegetable crop regulations, which are slightly different. So I think it's, in terms of management in the future, it's really, really important that we are closely looking at seed lots and seed samples that are coming into labs, and that it should be detected there. The really positive thing about this pest, I suppose, in a sense, is that it is quite easy to detect for a couple of reasons, really. One is it only feeds on peas. Although the insect is quite small, it needs to feed on pea flowers. Eggs can be recognised on the pods, and it's visible in the seed quite easily. So from a detection point of view, that should make it easier for the industry to track it and trace it and make sure that it's not being moved around the country. And that's critical, really, I think, in terms of seed movement, is we need to try and ensure that it's not moved.
How have they tackled it it's mainly Northern Europe, I think, where this has been an issue for quite a long time, I think. Has it had much of an impact on the sector in Northern Europe?
It does. It impacts in the way that you mentioned, really. I think it's in the value of the produce. So, you're effectively downgrading probably from a human consumption product to an animal feed product. It hasn't finished industries off, but there are, I mean, as I say, in New Zealand, they banned production in a region where they first discovered it, and that was successful, but it took 2 years to do that. So 2 years of not growing peas. In other countries, they will use insecticides, and we do have 2 insecticides available in vining peas and 1 in combining peas that should be quite effective actually for bruchid. So insecticides are the main way of trying to deal with this type of issue. There are other probably IPM techniques such as trap cropping that might be able to use, and monitoring is key really. So in many countries they're sweep netting to monitor for presence, and often they will only treat the outer edge of the crop because that tends to be where the bruchids sort of congregate, in the outer edges of on the field margins. In terms of insecticides that we currently have in the UK, there's the one that we have in combining peas is a product called Insist, which is acetamiprid, and it should be effective. There's no resistance that I'm aware of at the moment that pea bruchid has to that, and that we can use in combining peas from the early flowering stage. So that's quite a useful product, really. I think we probably, and most other countries would take the same approach, is that you're trying to apply the products to kill the adults before they lay eggs. So we're looking really at that sort of early flowering timing, then followed up with a second application. And then if we look at tank mix lists, we just need to determine whether there are other products that we would include with that in order to reduce the chances of resistance arising. We have another product in vining peas called Monecto 1, which is cyanotroniliprole, and that can be used post-flowering. It cannot be used during flowering. So, and we know that should work for bruchid beetles as well. So there are products that we can use. I think the other important thing to remember is that canopy penetration can be a bit tricky in the crops that we're talking about, in pea crops. So, we don't want to reduce water rates if we see this issue, and we want to get the best activity that we can, really. So what we hope is that this is an isolated incident, of course. We do hope that that's the case, and we've had no reports from elsewhere apart from this one so far. But I think like you say, Ben, we just need to raise awareness and make sure that if people do see it in crops, that they know how to deal with it properly.
And that's what we wanted to get across today from the podcast, is to be able to identify what a pea bruchid damage instance looks like. Podcast not the ideal way of explaining it. There are videos on our YouTube Shorts channel where you can see what the beetle looks like. You can see the damage that it inflicts on a pea. But perhaps they're quite. Something that struck me about them compared to other pest damage is they're quite neat and tidy in the way that they eat their way out of the pea, aren't they?
That very much so. It's a very distinct circular hole, and there is a risk, I think, that people might mistake pea moth damage for pea bruchid damage, but pea moth damage is not as neat and tidy. It's not as distinct a hole as you get with pea bruchid. That's very tidy indeed, and it's roughly the same size, I suppose, as the beetle. So you're talking about a 5 millimeter hole, roughly, which is significant size for a pea. As I mentioned earlier, the other thing that you may see is not the hole, but actually a translucent circle on the surface of the pea. So that's basically it's the seed coat that the bruchid leaves until it's ready to emerge. And they can overwinter in the pea as well, of course. So they may stay in the pea during storage. They don't do any further damage during storage at all. It's just literally once they're adults, they're just hibernating through the winter. But of course, then when the seed's planted in the spring, if we have conditions like we had this year, where we have quite a dry drilling period and the peas go into nice warm soils, the bruchids will survive that process of being planted. And I think that's probably what's happened this year.
So what is it that we need anyone who has some peas in stores or is receiving peas as part of a purchase, what do we need them to do?
So in the first instance, if you have any doubt at all and you think there's any possibility that there's a pea bruchid infestation in the seed lot, take photos, try and get really good quality photos, and you can report them through the PGRO Crop Monitor app. And that is available on at Google and Apple stores. That report will come directly to me. So if you've taken several really good quality pictures, we should be able to tell you whether that is actually Bruchid beetle. We're not recommending that people send samples to us just for the reasons we've talked about so far, and that we're trying not to move the insect around the country too much at all, in fact. So that's the first thing to do is to report it to us, and then we will look at determining whether it actually is there. In seed, then there's several choices, I think, from then onwards, which we're currently putting together a management plan in conjunction with AIC to really work out what the next steps would be, i.e. fumigation, for instance. It's not a reportable pest at the moment. Well, it isn't. I.e. AFA do not require us to report it. So, but if it's present in seed, the guidance they've given us is that it should not be moved. The only reason it should be moved is to be disinfected or fumigated. So that's the first thing to do, really. And then I think, in the next few days, we will have a robust management plan in the event that we, A, start to see multiple seed lots with infestations, or B, we start to see it in crops again next year.
Yeah, what we don't want to do at this stage is to speculate about what needs to be done in order to try and control this pest best. That requires a sort of careful amount of thought and some deliberation before that's communicated out to any growers or agronomists that are listening to this. That guidance will come, but it will come over time. So at the moment, the key message is all about vigilance and making sure that you can identify and find out where this pest is, if indeed it is there. I mean, the good news, I guess, from this, just to finish on a positive note, Becky, is that we have only had that one instance so far.
That's right, absolutely. And I think, that's really, really important. And as you say, it's really positive that it's only been reported in that one field, actually. So the next step for PGRO will be to put images onto our app as well, so that people can see what they're looking for. That will be done, as I say, in the next few days. So once people have uploaded the app, they can go to the Pea Bruchid section and see exactly what they should be seeing if it was present. So, and let's hope not.
Let's hope so. Well, thank you for taking the time to explain that. I hope that's been helpful for those who are listening. Just to summarise, if you are interested in finding out a bit more about this pest and what you need to look for or do, please go to the PGRO website. There's various bits of information on there. We'll be creating a master page at some point with all of the information on one area where you can go and find out everything you need to know about the Pea Bruchid. And as Becky said, please download the PGRO Crop Monitor app from your chosen app supplier, and you'll be able to report anything that you see on there, and Becky will be able to pick up anything that you send through to her. So that's it for today. Keep in touch with the PGRO online and through our social media and YouTube accounts. Please subscribe if you like listening to this podcast, and you'll be alerted every time we've dropped a new episode. But that's it for today. Thank you for listening.